Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast on the Class. Breakfast on the Class today is dedicated by the Daniel S. Loeb Torah Center Silver donors Anna and Adam Amsalem in honor of the IDF and for the safe return of our hostages. Also, Mazal Tov and congratulations to Sam Lowe on his engagement to Lior Rothschild from the Lowe and Rothschild families. Chazak Baruch, Mazal Tov Dorot Yisharim Mevorach. Nathan, Chazak Baruch. Year of Breakfast on the Class is dedicated loving memory of Yishmat Ruth Orfali Bat Adela, sponsored by our family, and dedicated as well for Fuash Ne'ema of Eliyahu Mazaf Fortuné and Hayim Feldman Frida, and for the continued health of Chana Bat Sima Fega. Let us begin. So, my friends, I want to share with you a very interesting piece of the Haggadah. Something that I thought was an interesting observation that actually changes the nature of what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're fulfilling on the night. The Haggadah says, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Azariah, used to say, Hare ani ki ben 70 shana, I'm 70 years old, and I did not merit that they should say Yitziat Mitzrayim balelot. I did not merit that they should say Yitziat Mitzrayim, mention the fact that we left Egypt at night. Until Ben Zoma came along and said, that you must mention the leaving of Egypt kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. So every single day of your life you got to say, you got to mention, we left Egypt. Did you know that? Did you mention Egypt today? That's like a thing from the Torah. Your calendar should flash Egypt, and it should not be a timed event in your calendar. It should be an all-day event in your calendar so that it doesn't expire. You got to say it. Now, by the way, we mention Egypt in Shema in the morning, in the evening. So we have many attempts, many opportunities to mention Egypt, but you have to mention it every day. Comes along Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and he says you got to do it at night. The Chachamim say no, you don't have to do it at night also. Why does it say Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life? In order to include Yemot HaMashiach. It's coming to tell you that not only are we going to mention Yitziat Mitzrayim now, but even after the Mashiach arrives, and we have our final redemption, not just the first redemption, but the final redemption, even at that point, still we'll have an obligation to remember Yitziat Mitzrayim. Okay? Everyone so far got this idea? You with me? At the very least, even if you don't have to say it every night, like the Chachamim hold, you have to say it at least every day, correct? So why are we going crazy that there's a mitzvah to tell over the story of Yitziat Mitzrayim on the night of Passover, if there's a mitzvah every single day of the year? Good question? Please only answer amen if you're listening to this live. Baruch atah Adonai. Elohim melech haolam. Sha'akol yabaro. My friends, you know who asked this question? This question was famously asked by the Brisker Rav. And he answers a very interesting answer. One might even assume a very halachic, a very practical answer. Says the Brisker Rav that Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim, remembering Egypt, and Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of Egypt, are fundamentally different things. And there are three differences, primary differences, between one and the other. The first difference is Zechirah, the mitzvah that you have every day. The first difference is that Sipur, telling the story, is asked in a question-answer format. So someone asks you a question, you answer, that's Sipur. Zechirah, you don't need anybody else, you just remember, we left Egypt. The second thing, the second difference between Zechirah and Sipur, second differential, is that Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim requires only remembering that you left Egypt. It doesn't involve the props of the night of the Seder. On the night of the Seder, we have to explain, why are we eating matzah? Why are we eating maror? And why are we eating korban Pesach? Okay? The matzah we're eating because the bread did not have the time to rise. The maror we're eating to remember the bitter herbs. The Pesach we're eating because HaKadosh Baruch Hu jumped over the houses and he saved the Jewish people. Okay? In Makat Bechorot. If you did not do those three things, what does Rabban Gamliel tell us in the Haggadah? You didn't fulfill your obligation. On every other night of the year, you don't have to mention matzah, maror, Pesach. You just have to talk about the fact that we left Egypt. That's the second difference. The third difference, okay? The third difference between Zichira, remembering, and Sipur, says the Brisker Rav. The third difference is that there's a condition called Matchil Begenut Umisayem Bishvach. That you start with a negative, so to speak, with the shame, and you end with the praise. Now, what does it mean that we start with the shame with regards to the night of the Seder? We start with Avadim Ayinu, we start with Terach, we start with Arami Oved Avi, the Jewish people were idol worshippers, and then we became this nation, we received the Torah. So those three conditions are the conditions of Sipur. That's what the Brisker Rav explains. But let me add one more piece. Rabbi Gladstein brings as well in the name of Rabbi Pomeranchik, he says that that's why in the text of the Haggadah, the text of the Haggadah is bringing this out. We start by telling you in the Haggadah, guys, big mitzvah tonight, to tell over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. But really, you have a mitzvah every night. So what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Therefore, we then continue immediately following this idea that you have to tell it every night, is what's the difference? Why is this night a different item? How come we lean? How come we eat matzah? We're asking in the form of questions. There's 4 sons. What do the 4 sons have? Questions. What's the answer to the questions? Answer. That's Sipur. Not only that, when do we do this? On this night with the matzah, the maror in front of you. Pesach zu, matzah zu, maror zu. We mention each of the items at the table. And finally, the last piece is we matchil beginut, we tell over the beginning, the shame part of the story. Now, up until here is the practical elements of the difference between Zechirah and Sipur. I would like to suggest something completely different, based on what the Brisker Rav is telling us. But I'd like to suggest something completely different. The word Sipur means to tell a story. But the word Sipur also means something else. It also means to count. Sfirat HaOmer. Right? Lispor, to tell over. So the words, when words in Hebrew mean 2 things, there's a meeting point, a nexus, at which the true definition of the word, with all of its variances, are brought to life. And let me explain what I mean by this. What are people doing when they are counting anything? What is the function of counting something? We know in the Torah, what do we count in the Torah? We count how many Jews there are, right? We count the Omer. What is the purpose of counting? The Gemara tells us that God counts the Jews repeatedly in the desert to show the Jewish people how much He loves them. So He counts them when they leave Egypt. But then when there's a plague and a bunch of them die, what does God do? He counts them again. To say, like the expression of Chazal is, Lada'at minyan hanotarim, to know how many are left. You have a person who loves his money, he spends all of his time counting his money. So when someone is counting something, and repeatedly counting something, It illustrates that this thing is important to them. By the way, counting and importance can be for the positive and it can be for the negative. The Nazis kept impeccable records of how many Jews they killed. Not because the Jews were precious to them, but if counting means something is important to you and you want to know exactly how many of that thing you have, why did it bother them so much how many Jews they'd killed? The answer is because it's not the live Jew that they were counting. They were counting the dead Jew. The dead Jew was very important to them. It was precious. It was important. So counting signifies the importance of something. But my friends, if I want to communicate to somebody how important something is, the irony is that on the opposite side of the spectrum of counting, where something is just a number, is the parallel opposite of that reality, where I treat the thing as the opposite of a number. And I want you to notice that to me this is fascinating, the observation of this. If you say that there's 6 million Jews that died in the Holocaust, that were murdered, that were brutally gassed and shot and stabbed and starved, then that number becomes just a number. Where is the tragedy in the 6 million people that died? In the individual stories of each and every person. This is who they were. This is what they lived for. These were the people that they loved, and these were the people that loved them. This was what this person might have accomplished. At the young age of 12, he invented this item. He finished these books. Who might he have been? So on the one hand, reducing a person to a number strips the person of their story. On the other hand, sipur means that the person is anything but a number. My friends, how do we reconcile the two opposites of these things? Fascinating, huh? That a word could mean two opposite ends of the spectrum. And the answer, I believe, is the night of the Seder. The night of the Seder, we're encouraged not Zachor, that number, we always say that when it comes to the Holocaust. You see, people use that word in every Holocaust memorial. Remember, right? Never forget. But when it comes to the night of the Seder, we have an obligation not just to not forget, but to tell the stories. And I think that in sharing the minutia of how things went, how they slowly were fooled, were tricked into slavery, how they suffered, the hope that they had, the hope that was then taken away when Paro requires them to work even harder. By sharing the story, something happens in the hearts and in the minds of our children, and that is that the number becomes not just a tragedy, but a reality. So when the Brisker Rav is telling you that one has this obligation, this obligation, this obligation, he's not just telling you that sipur is zechira, that a story is a remembering with three conditions. He's telling you here's three reasons in which a story is fundamentally different to a memory, to a remembrance. He's telling you that if you cannot bring out the protagonists of the story's journey, where they went from, when they went to, then you did not tell a story. If I tell you that my father's a rabbi in Deal, New Jersey, there are this number of people in his community. Is that the story? If I tell you that there's X number of people that come to learn Torah in this synagogue, is that the story? No. To tell a story, you need to dip your toe into the shame. You know, there's synagogues in Bnei Brak that maybe have more people learning than here. But that's to be expected. It's a city of Torah. I don't think anyone ever thought that Manhattan is a city of Torah. At least not until now. The story of learning in this room is not fully realized. It's not fully understood until you ask, well, what was it like before? Where were people before? And where are they now? That's why Matchil Beginut is the ABC ingredient of a story. The second condition is, it needs to be asked with questions and answers. Now, I don't know if any of you are public speakers. But one of the requirements for public speaking is a awareness for where a person is in terms of listening to what you're saying. So as an example, if I'm giving a speech and people are on their phones and they're not listening, I'm not achieving anything with my speech because they're not listening. So what might I do if I notice that a bunch of people are on their phones? Sorry? There's different techniques. One technique is to stop talking. Yeah? What other techniques are there?
What are you doing now?
Ask a question. Ask a question. Force the audience to respond to what you're asking them. Then the person says, like, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last thing you said. Yeah, that and all the other things that I said. But what's the answer to this question? The nature of question and answer says that this is not an obligation I'm dispensing with. I have a mitzvah to just say the words, we left Egypt. It has to land on the person. And if the person is not listening, then what happens? Then you didn't do anything. With Zichira, I mention it. That's all I have to do. With Sipur, I need to engage you. You need to be moved by the story. If there's no story arc, not only don't you understand it, but it also doesn't move you. Pesach Matzah Maror says, all year long we talk about leaving Egypt. But you know what? If it didn't hit, then I need props. What does this mitzvah remind you of? I'll never forget that on my honeymoon, there was a popular song at that time that had come out. And it was playing non-stop everywhere. Every wedding, every occasion, all over, was playing non-stop. I'm now married since 1999. Bezat Hashem, soon, this June 17th, will be my Yud Ke Vav Ke anniversary, 26. In case any of you, how old are you? There you go. So when you were 1, 26 years ago, I got married. So at that point, this song came out, and 26 years later, if ever I hear the song, ever, instantly I'm transported back to the West Coast, to that time of my life, renting a car, driving down the coast. Ben, you know that, what's the name of that forest? Ben Sur?
Big Sur.
Big Sur, there you go. I should remember that. My wife's name is Big Sur. Speed, come on, speed. There you go. Yeah, I'm instantly transported back to, what is it, Lombard Street in San Francisco, right? That street. The music was playing when I was in the car driving down that street, actually terrified, by the way. It was one of those cars that drives, that was, that didn't have great gas, brake pedal. They weren't talking to each other, the gas pedal and the brake pedal. So the streets are like this, and you're in traffic. So there's a car in front of you and a car behind you. and you're uphill. So you take your foot off of the brake, you roll back and hit the guy behind you. So what do? You quickly hit the gas, but then you roll forward and hit the guy in front of you. So it's basically this incredibly anxiety-ridden moment. Formula One, just with inches. All it takes for me to go back there is that sense, something touching one of my 5 senses, music, something that you're hearing, taste, right? Association. Even today, if I smell anywhere in the world a honeysuckle, I'm back in my backyard in Deal, New Jersey, running around with a jar, right? We had a whole fence filled with honeysuckles, running around with a jar in my backyard as a child, catching fireflies. Instant. It's like a time machine. Takes you back like that. The Chachamim understood that the Sipur of Yetziat Mitzrayim was so important that we needed props. You needed to have a bitter taste in your mouth. You needed to see the matzot, right? Taste the matzot, crunching. You remember, we didn't have time. All we had was these crackers. When we left, I remember once we were on a vacation and there was no kosher food in this place. It was in Turkey and there was no kosher food there. And we like overdosed on a certain kind of pretzel. I can still taste that vacation. It's a strange thing. But my friends, the question I want to pose to you today is, if that's the point of Sipur, Zechira is dispensing with an obligation to remember something. Sipur is engaging in that thing. It's why on the night of the Seder, unlike every other Zechira in the year, you have an obligation to remember as if you yourself left Egypt. It's not a separate obligation. We have a Mitzvah Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and also, hey, separate thing, unrelated news, you have an obligation to feel like you yourself were there. No, the whole point of Sipur is so that you feel like you yourself were there. That's really what the Brisker Rav is telling us by giving us these 3 conditions. There are 3 ways in which Sipur is so different than Zechira. You need to get there. By the way, I try with my children to meditate. I ask them to close their eyes, to imagine an ocean of people in robes pulling, horses, right? Could you smell the horses? There's dust swirling everywhere. Babies are crying. A mother is shushing a baby, telling the baby it's going to be fine. Someone's screaming, "Did you bring the matzot?" It's just being in that chaos of what it must have been like to leave, to walk out of this place. Yesterday I went to Muncie, and I bought. They have these Haggadahs that are like with like beautiful drawings, like animations. There's one that I bought that was written like a graphic novel. Another one that I bought that was written like just like a, how do you call it? Just beautifully illustrated. And there's a picture, even till this day, from the time my children were kids until today, they relate in the night of Seder to this one image. There's an old man, it's in the Katz Haggadah. There's an old man pushing a bar, with his hands. There's blood coming, leak from his hands. He's crying, he's leaning there like this. The look, just the image of this man being beaten and an Egyptian taskmaster standing over him with a whip. The hamchasha of that, the bringing to life of that is so incredibly important. So my friends, if it's so important to bring it to life, how could the word Sipur also mean a number? And the answer is, because in memory, we remember detail. The lens for the emotion needs to narrow. But to understand the magnitude of what God did, what does the lens need to do? It needs to widen. So if you want to know what the pain of Egypt was, draw me a picture of one old guy with his hands on the thing, blood coming out of the side of his mouth, with someone beating him, and the pain and the fear and the anguish and the desperation in his eyes. I need to get down to that level of minutia. I need to remember the taste and the crack of the the matzah cracker in my mouth, unless you're having soft matzot and you're Sephardic. On the flip side, did I understand? Did I get the power of God's salvation when I understand how many Jews there were? How big this problem was? This wasn't one baby dying. This was all of the baby boys. This is not the Bivas children or the Sharabi children. This is not a couple of kids that were made famous by social media, campaigns and orange balloons. This was every single Jewish baby boy. I want you to think of a mother getting pregnant and spending 9 months praying, crying to God, please Hashem, please let it be a girl. Didn't have ultrasounds, couldn't check. This was all the babies. When Amram splits off from his wife, he says, I'm not doing this. I'm not having any more children. I'm not bringing kids into the world that half of them should die and the other half should live in these conditions. I'm not doing this. And when he separates from his wife, what happens? All the Jews do. You know what that moment was? That was a mass moment, a moment of mass desperation, a moment of mass depression, a moment of mass giving up hope. Could you imagine all the Jewish people, every couple, every family saying, the Jewish nation, it's been beautiful, wonderful while we had it. Nice ride. Could you imagine the Jews signing their own death warrant? There will be no more Jews. You can't do that with one child. That's the Sipur Mispar. So my friends, I think that there's a challenge in front of us. A challenge in front of us to be able to communicate to our children on this night, this mitzvah, in the right way, to get them to that place, to feel the difficulty, to feel the arc of the Jewish story, to feel the gratitude that Hashem took us out, to feel what it would feel like had He not taken us out back then at exactly that moment, that we would still be a subjugated, broken people, thousands of years later. My friends, I want to share with you a secret. There's a famous line, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I think what they mean is if you order kosher food in Vegas, you don't want to take it out because it won't be as fresh, so what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's what it means. Let everyone give their own interpretations. My friends, what happened in Egypt doesn't stay in Egypt. The whole of Jewish identity was built on this principle. On the slavery of the Jews, on the taking out of the Jews, on the receiving of the Torah. That window is the origin story, if you will, of Am Yisrael as a nation. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov tribes, Egypt, pum, 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 pum. That V, that's what made the Jewish people. Now let me be clear. Without that story, without that Matchil Beginut, Misayem B'Shvach, where we start at Terach, go to Abraham, go down to the bottom, Egypt, come back up, receive the Torah. Without that story, there is no Jewish people. So I'll ask you this, and this is how I end. Okay, if that's the point here, how am I who I am because of that story? I need you to get this. If the Torah is obsessed, so obsessed, with the children understanding this, if that's what the Torah is, so that we want you to do it, don't just say it. Let them ask questions, answer the questions. If they're not asking questions, do weird things so that they ask questions. Don't just do it that way. Make sure you have props on the table, food that you're eating that's reminding them of those things. Make sure that they get it. It is so important to their survival that they get it, that if you don't do this, there are no Jews. That's what the night of the Seder is asking. So let me ask you the follow-up question to that. The follow-up question to that is, forget your kids for a minute. You, Dan. How is Dan Arbus, how's Nathan Lowe, Avi Oster, how are you, because of this arc? I'll just give you a crazy example of that. If you're a person that feels the pain of people, engages in the pain of people, that might be part of how the origin story has affected you. Because I know what it feels like to be a slave in Egypt, like the Torah says repeatedly. Understand this person, feel for this person, because you also went through this. That might be how the origin story plays out in your life. If you're a person who puts tefillin on every day, why are you putting tefillin on? Because God took the Jewish people out of Egypt. That is a daily activity that I am doing. Because that story is in my bones, in my blood. This story made me. When people ask me why I became a rabbi, I have a very specific story that tells how I became a rabbi. I grew up as the son of a rabbi. I thought I would never want to be a rabbi. I saw all the responsibilities and how difficult it was and how the job never ever ends. And then, over a span of 2 weeks, 2 or 3 things happened that made me change my mind. That is the origin story for how I decided I was going to become a rabbi. This is your story. And if you can't find this story in your life, then you are not where you're supposed to be. There's something missing from your life. Isn't that interesting? That's the concept here. So I will let this idea, because there's a million outcomes of this idea. Every person can figure out their own end of the sentence in this. If you're a person who loves having guests over for Shabbat, and you invite random people to your home and feed them, that's a continuation of this story. From Avraham Avinu, who welcomed guests into his house, to going to a place where people were rejected and people were seen as tools to be used. You see people as beautiful, as special, as worthy of respect, as worthy of taking care of. That's an example. Figure out what this is. And then understand that while on a story version, you are the main character in your story, on the number version, you are part of an army. I want you to imagine a person moves to a community with his young wife, and he sees that in this community, people are not kind. So he starts having classes on chesed, and some people are learning a little bit, but he's not getting the job done. So one night he comes home to his wife and he says, honey, we're going to live here for the rest of our lives. The people here, they just don't understand what kindness is. They don't get it. Where I come from, people welcome people in, hachnasat orchim. People gave tzedakah. People spoke nicely to other people. People tried everything they could do to help one another. We have to change it. She says, okay, so what do you want to do? He says, tell me if you're game. I want to have a big family, like 10 kids. I want our kids to grow up at a table where they see what Achnasat Orchim looks like. I want to take my kids down the road and put money in some guy's cup who's sitting on the floor. I want to go with my kids and walk into a person in a hospital who's given up hope and raise their spirits. I want to do that. There's no one I could raise better than my own family. That I have limitless educational opportunities. And if I train my family in the most beautiful way, then they'll change other people. Our family will change this community. Imagine I said that to my wife. By the way, I did say that to my wife. I didn't say let's have 10 kids. I said let's have as many kids as we can handle, as we could give to, as we could nurture. And I raised the children in my home on my values. And I hope and I pray and I wish and I pray and I every day and I beg that every one of those kids builds a home just like the home I was taught to build by my parents. My parents built a family like that. That's how you change a community. But my friends, it's also how you change a world. It's not just me and my wife that had this conversation. It's not just my father and my mother who had this conversation. It was Abraham and Sarah who had this conversation. But you know who else it was who had this conversation? God in heaven. Hashem says, let me start a family that will train their children. And they will train their children. And they will inspire all those around them. And God waited 26 generations until he found a family he could give the Torah to. He waited so many generations, 10 generations from Adam to Noach, 10 generations from Noach to Avram, until he found a person who would start a family like that. And Hashem said to Avram, you're my man, because I know that it was command et banav et beto acharai. He will command his family to follow in my ways. You are part of that family. You are part of that plan. You were made to be able to change this world. On the night of the Seder, we explained to our children that they're not just part of any family. They're part of a family that ultimately is the people that's supposed to bring Mashiach to the world, that's supposed to end war, that's supposed to change the trajectory for every people on the face of this earth. That is our challenge on this night. And until you finish it, don't end the Seder. Kol hamarbe lesaper mitziat Mitzrayim הרי זה משובח. רבי חנניה בן הקשה אומר, יצא הקדוש ברוך הוא זכות ישראל. לפיכך הרבה להם